Okay, so we did this last year actually, but you know, we lost a few weeks here, so So I figured let's do a summary, remind ourselves of all the different models of electricity on Shabbos. Now that we've studied a bit Hilchos Yom Tov, we can reflect a little bit on those. And then, I know it's a bit late towards the end of the semester, but we should probably start trying to write. And if it goes into the second semester, which it will, that's fine. But we should do that. So here, if you remember on the source sheets, we have a summary. So remind me, why is electricity, what are the classic models of why electricity is problematic on Shabbos / Yom Tov?
And fire.
So one is fire, at least in the case of incandescent light bulbs and the like. There is a position, admittedly, though neither this year nor last year did we spend too much time on it, but it is true that Rav Kook believes that electricity, not just incandescent light bulbs, is considered mavir, is creation of fire, but there is a bit of a machloket post Rav Kook, what Rav Kook meant. Many moderns just assume that Rav Kook is talking about when there are sparks. Right? A lot of sort of early people thought that electricity was fire because the circuitry wasn't so great. There were sparks a lot, so they just said, oh, there's actual fire. And therefore, a lot of moderns will just say, look, yes, there were people 100 years ago or 70 years ago, whatever, who said that electricity is fire, but they didn't mean it, right? Meaning, they meant it, but they were mistaken. They just thought that they saw sparks. They don't mean electricity per se. They meant what they saw of electricity. Rav Malamud doesn't believe that, actually. Rav Malamud thinks that Rav Kook meant it, that mavir isn't just fire, it's also the creation of any sort of power source. Right? And electricity is like that, right? It's not quite fire in the chemical sense, but it has certain similar traits, and the creation of that is mavir. Now, if that's the case, now that we've seen Yom Tov, so let's reflect on Yom Tov for a minute. If electricity, let's say Rav Malamud were right about Rav Kook's interpretation that all electricity is mavir. So then, what would the halacha be on Yom Tov? Would you be able to use electricity on Yom Tov according to that model?
Yeah.
So, yes, but
Only for cooking.
no, you could use it for anything, because mavir we saw probably, at least according to the Rambam, is hutra, that you don't even need a justification, or maybe you need it for tzorach Yom Tov, but beyond that you don't need a justification. But what wouldn't you be able to do potentially? Start a new flame, right? Start a new, because it might be the problem of molid-ish, right? So it wouldn't be d'oraisa, but it might be d'rabbanan, might, right? Meaning, then you'd have to figure out it's turning on a light switch. Molid is a creation of a new fire, or is it just a channeling of the electricity that already exists at the plant, in which case maybe it would even be mutter, right? But it definitely wouldn't be d'oraisa if you actually thought it was mavir. Okay. The Chazon Ish, as we saw, said, what is electricity on Shabbos? Why is it prohibited? Chazon Ish said, I gave you the little summary here, it's bonus, /makro, the building of the circuit is one model. The second is that the bringing to life of the appliance, he also sees as a form of building. So, if electricity is building on Yom Tov, so is it permitted or prohibited? Prohibited, except, right, with one little twist, according to who would it not necessarily be prohibited? At least not biblically? Tosfot. Remember that weird Tosfot we saw a while ago, that because making cheese is bonus, so therefore anything which is like that is going to be only d'Rabbanan, but therefore presumably, according to Tosfot, using electricity for non-food related things would be asur midirabbanan, but maybe using it for food related things would be permitted, just like making cheese, which is boneh and nevertheless permitted on Yom Tov. Reuven Shmelkis thought that it's molid, and we talked about this. Molid would apply on Yom Tov if it applies at all, which is very unclear. As we saw, it's huge machloket, how we paskin. And then there was Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who we saw, who, as we said, is not clear, right? Rosh Shlomo Zalman doesn't really like any of the pre-existing sarot, but he suggests one possibility that it is rabbinic on Molid in deference to Beit Yitzchak. If that's the case, then whatever we said about Beit Yitzchak in terms of electricity on Yom Tov would be true for Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. If he thinks it's a minhag or a custom, presumably you would have to gauge, does this custom apply even on Yom Tov? Which is the way Ray Broyd and Ray Jackster, in their article quite a while ago at this point, take Rosh Shlomo Zalman. And if you think that, no, it's really permitted, but we treat it as prohibited because it's not in the spirit of Shabbat. So then we'd have to figure out, well, do the rules of the spirit of Shabbat and Yom Tov, do they differ? Right? Presumably they might, especially around Ochel Nefesh related things where the very flavor of the day is in fact different on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So if it's about the spirit of the day, we would have to distinguish. Now, as we noted last year, and we've mentioned several times in the last few weeks, there never really was a consensus, right? Electricity really was a bit unclear. So therefore, trying to figure out conclusively why electricity is prohibited on Shabbat or Yom Tov is difficult. Add to that the fact that new technology changes things, as we've talked about, right? Things that are very unclear in terms of whether they're considered performing an act, motion sensors, speech-controlled things, mind-controlled things, right, et cetera. And this is only going to become worse, right? I was reading an article, seems like forever ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, right? It really does seem like forever ago, where it was fascinating. It was an article about architecture, where the author noted, I'm not sure if he was an architect or a historian of architecture, not clear exactly, I don't know exactly what he did, but he noted that historically, very significant catastrophes in society, one of the ripple effects has been changes in architecture. Because it changes the way we think about what is needed in a home or in a building or an office, right? And he was predicting in the beginning that Corona is going to hyperspeed the move towards automated homes, right? And we've already sort of moved there, but now we have like this fear of doorknobs and buttons on elevators because we were so obsessed about washing machines and everything. So people will be more amenable to touchless buildings.
I was listening to the podcast that was saying that the pandemic is probably affect the number of windows.
Correct. So that was right, exactly, and that was the second one. Was that as we learned about the importance of ventilation in terms of minimizing the intensity of viral load that you could get, right, in a time period, ventilation. The way we think of ventilation is probably going to change. Look, it is very strange, but Israeli windows are very different from American windows. Right? Israel, and if you ever seen a construction site, it's I always found that I never could quite put my finger on what exactly was so different until you look at a construction site, and then you realize, in America, the feeling you get is basically you build a house, right, and then you cut out a little hole and you put a window on top of it, right? And they don't know, right? That's sort of the feel, you have smaller windows, right? And when you open a window, you open it a little bit, right? Compared to an Israeli window, right? Israeli windows, if you see, it's like this huge hole in the concrete, right? And if you ever notice how big these windows open, one of the big reasons that that a lot of people put bars, right? Some of it is because they want people breaking in. But one of the reasons is because Israeli windows open much more than American windows. Where American windows open up and only a certain amount, right?
My window opens probably. Mine goes side to side.
Right. So some go side to side, but even when they do, they go a limit. Right? They're very limited. I mean, I remember in YU, right, at some point there had been an attempted suicide, so they just made it that none of the windows could open, right, enough that a person could get out of. In Israel, anybody can get out of any window, right? A full-sized adult, right? In America, if you saw a window where an adult could get out of, you'd be like, oh, that's a big window. In Israel, you would say that's a window, right? That's just window, right? They're just much bigger, right? They're much, much bigger.
Maybe I'm just more curious.
I don't know. I mean, look, in my house, the way, I know that growing up, I needed to turn on lights in my house during the day sometimes. It's not true in my house now. In my house, unless it's really, really cloudy, there is barely an inch in the house, which is not full, besides the bathroom, right, which is not fully lit by natural light. Okay, so you're lucky. Maybe it's a New York thing. I don't know. Whatever.
It's definitely smaller windows in cities, but like in New York, you're lucky if all your windows have windows.
Yeah, maybe it's a New York thing. I don't know. Even though I live in, even though I grew up in Staten Island, which is not quite. Anyways, but yeah. So, but the point I wanted to get at with this was simply that something like this could affect the problems that we have halachically, right? Because as we know, right, motion sensors create problems for people on Shabbos. The move towards key cards in hotels has forced everyone to ask the question, what's the status of a key card on Shabbos, right? But the second our houses start to move to that, right, like standardly, which they've already started, but if this hyperspeeds it, what?
You can't get like a normal non-electric soda, like soda stream is
Soda stream isn't electric.
It's hard to find. They only have the bigger ones for this small bottle.
Okay. And I do think that this will create interesting problems. It already does, right? I mean, it already does. I know, like, the number of times I've heard shilohs about this. It's like the hotel key card I get a lot, but even if you can solve that, because some hotels will give you they'll have a few rooms with whatever, or if they're having an event, they'll have one of the non-Jews stand there and open your door for you, and halacha story for another time. But like the bathrooms in the public spaces are often completely right with an electric eye, and this creates problems, right? And I remember one of my friends was, I forget if it was Yale or Princeton, was the rabbi on campus, but even in the buildings they have from the university where the shul is, right? You have that problem. It's not like, right, most shuls will build, Shabbos-friendly bathrooms. But if you're in a university and they're giving you a building, giving you a room, giving you a conference room, it doesn't have that option, right? So the combination of the fact that it's becoming more widespread, and as we talked about, the halacha wasn't settled, made it that electricity, people are asking the questions again. And as we talked about last year, this is when we talked about it, specifically on Yom Tov, this became a cause, this became quite the celebrated issue last year on Pesach, when the Sephardi rabbis, the rabbis of Maghreb, or whatever they called themselves, had issued the psak that, look, electricity on Yom Tov was never really usher, and therefore you should be allowed to zoom into seders. Right? Now you understand why, as complicated as it is on Shabbos, right now, last year we sort of briefly outlined it, but now you get why it's plausible for a bunch of people to get up and say, aha, Yom Tov, right? Yom Tov is different. So even if you don't want to do it on Shabbos, but on Pesach, you could zoom into the Seder, right? Please God, we're done by Pesach this year. I hope to God we are done with this by Pesach. I know we won't in the whole world. Maybe in Israel. Maybe it will be done. So in Israel, we might be done by Pesach. We might be. I don't know. Whether we'll be done outside of Israel, very unlikely. But maybe here we'll be done. Maybe, please God, we'll be done. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. It's exhausting. It's like, sure, certain benefits, now it is more natural to offer a Zoom share because it's become normal. So yes, I can connect to people more easily back in North America. Therein ends the benefits, and we're done. Right? Like now, right? Most part, I'm like sick of Zoom, but for people who were not as likely to be able to connect. What? That's cool. That's cool. They do have a nice community there. Yes, they do have a nice community there in Uganda. It's not a huge community, but it's a nice community. I've not been there. I have a good family friend of ours growing up. She did after she finished midwifery school. So you have to do like a certain amount of time in a high-risk place, right, where they just have a lot of births, so you get practice. So you could go to like certain places in the States where they have, just a high birth rate and, less affluent areas. But she decided to go to Uganda and ended up meeting her husband there in that small community, and they got married. It was like okay. So let's see how much you remember from last year. Normally I feel like bad. I have this thing that I don't like giving the same share. I don't like reviewing topics because I have a problem really internalizing the fact that people don't remember what we did last year.
But we're looking at it from a future.
Yeah, so that's why I'm okay with this, right? Because we really did a lot more material, so it really is, it's the same sources, but we have a lot more background. I had this problem, I had to apologize to my students this morning. I was like, until today, this year, I was trying to avoid the classic sugyas in Bava Basra for the most part because, like, I learned Bava Basra when I was in Shan Aleph, and I just felt like if I teach the classic sugyas that I learned back in Shan Aleph, it's going to be too much the way I learned it then. I can't really, I have trouble rethinking sugyas because, like, it's helpful to rethink sugyas if you've forgotten the sugyas a little bit. The less you forget, the harder it is to rethink them. But today I gave in and started the third paragraph of Basra, but, like, I just had deja vu. I just went back to, I was back at, 18-year-old self learning in Rav Moshe's share. And, like, I was like, look, I don't know if I have rethought this. And, when I come back to it, I'm still back, in 2006. Like, yeah. My guys get more scared when, like, I hold them responsible for what they did in high school, which for them is not so long ago, right? But, like, I've given share on, I could still tell you what I did my first day in 9th grade. Like, it's like, so, like, but whatever, yeah, I try very hard to, like, not hold people to that, but, like, I really do hold people to that. It's sort of the reality. My son, by the way, is like that. It's very funny to me. Like my 5-year-old, he's very, very much like that. He's just like, remembers everything from forever. I'm like, okay, hopefully it'll stay that way, and it's helpful for Makaros. It is helpful for Makaros. Okay, so what do we do with this? So as we noted, in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of rethinking of these issues. And again, last year was really evidence of that around Pesach time. But we outlined 3 main models, right? What I call the substantive model, right? The return to meta principles, and the sort of muddling through approach. Okay, again, we'll see how much you remember from last year, but one was Rav Asher Weiss. So we already saw that the Chazon Ish thought it was boneh, it was building, or makeh patish. But by that he meant, in the formal sense, like you're building a circuit, or in his creative sense, that you are not just creating the circuit, but you are creating life in this appliance. Right? We saw that Chazon Ish's novelty. But Rav Asher Weiss has this different model, right? And based on the Yerushalmi, where the Yerushalmi tells the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that whenever they would have any action that would come before them that had previously not been assessed, so they would try to figure out what malacha it was. And the Yerushalmi says is they couldn't find what malacha it was, they would call it makeh patish, which is very weird, meaning either it's a malacha or it's not a malacha. What does it mean? They would try to figure out what malacha it is, and then if they couldn't figure out what malacha it was, so then they called it makeh patish. And what does that mean? Or makeh patish, technically. Fine. So Rav Asher argues that malacha is not really, right? It's not just a set of 39 categories. The fundamental nature of malacha is that it is creative. Right? It's creative. So what they would do is if you brought them a creative act, they would say, look, if it's creative in the precise ways that the other malachot are, so great. Then it's a malacha, right? If I plant something, it's creative in the sense that I am planting. That's called zoreya. That's pretty obvious. If I create in the sense that I cook, so then it's bishul. Very easy. Right? If I set up my loom, so then, and I deal, whatever exactly I do with the warp and woof, which no matter how many times I look at the pictures and try to understand it, I don't quite understand what's going on, then it's oseh shtei batei nirin, sure. Okay, it's, the very common malacha. But if something is undeniably creative, but you don't know what it is, so then you call it Makav Patish. Makav Patish is essentially the catch-all for creative activities that don't fit the formal definitions of the other. This brick thing is not. I don't know. It's fine. The other milachot. So right. So let's just look at Rav Asher Weiss. But now that we know more about electricity, so let's talk more substantively about what the problems are with Rav Asher's thesis. Right. So he said, "Kabalti lenachon hakundrus," and I've read what you sent me, which argue that electricity isn't really prohibited, that it's only the spirit of Shabbat. I don't agree with a single word of what you wrote. Right? It's ridiculous. What you said is terrible. It's a terrible error. Your conclusion, terrible. It's terrible. It's going to lead to many people to sin. The truth will show its way. I agree. You could doubt and question and nitpick with all the different arguments that have been preferred for why electricity is prohibited. But practically you want to be lenient, you are not part of the community. As if God himself issued from heaven a voice that said it is biblically prohibited. I think it is makev b'fatish biblically. Based on the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish looked at all actions. And they looked at it and they said, that's created, it must be a malacha. It's not the way you think, that first you teach us to fit a malacha. If yes, it's usher. If not, no. No, first they ask, is it creative? If it's creative, it must be usher. Why is it usher? Well, if it fits one of the 38 boxes, it's not makav patish. Great. If it doesn't, but it's undeniably creative, then it's makav patish. So that's how you should conceptualize electricity. Because it is the most important creative thing ever. And therefore, even LED, where there is no fire, no nothing, it's still going to be prohibited biblically. And that was Rav Asher's thesis. Now that we know a little bit more about electricity, why is that? On the one hand, it is attractive. It says that really malacha is about machshevet, it's about creativity, and therefore don't nitpick and tell me, hey, it is building a thing. It's not, like, it's creative. It does a lot of work. That's the essence of Shabbos. It's a day of rest. It's a day of not creating. This is, electricity is, it's, it allows us to basically run the modern world. So how could that not be creative? There's something compelling there. But what's the problem? There are a few problems. And there are a few major problems with Russia.
Well, you still have to be able to halacha-theory prove that electricity is creative, and not just like have it some kind of feeling.
Right. So one is that, look, maybe you disagree with his intuition. You say maybe it's not creative, or maybe it's not always creative. Meaning, right? Because you could subjectively look at it. And you could say, look, why are you telling me electricity is creative? Certain things I understand, right? Maybe either you say, look, it's not creative, maybe, or you say it depends, right? Like the case we'll get to in a minute, opening a door. Right, opening an electric door. Is that creative? Do you look at that and say, this is obviously creative? I don't know, right? Meaning, I understand that, you turn on a computer, okay, maybe it's creative, right? You now have access to a tremendous amount of information and what you can do, okay, maybe. But, do we perceive opening a door with an electric key card as a creative act? I don't think anyone would look at that, right? Maybe computers, yeah, we look at it. So, you're right. I think, first of all, he is based on intuition, right? That electricity is always creative, where you could argue and say, maybe not. That's one problem. A second problem I have, one of my biggest problems with Russia, I am partial to Russia sometimes. I go back and forth. Yeah, Abigail. Right, so I'll put a more formal take on what Abigail just said, which is, he says, it's created, it must be Usher Doraita. My problem, very simply, is the following. The way Rav Usher describes what he thinks Makah Patish is, sounds a little bit to me, a lot to me, like Molid. Right? Meaning, why would there be that complicated category called Molid of creating, which is rabbinically prohibited, if anything which is created is automatically biblically prohibited? Right? Meaning, the fact that there's a rabbinic category which is literally called creating, right? Molid. And we talked about it. What does it mean? Molid Eish, Molid Reyach, Molid this, Molid that. Is it also, is it mutter? The fact is that if Rav Asher is right, that anything which is created is automatically makeh b'patish, so then molid seems like a redundant category, right? Add to that, even worse, which is that, as we saw, it's not even clear that we paskin that molid is always usher, right? We saw a million machlokot. So it's not just that there's a rabbinic category called creating, but even that category, there are many people who say it doesn't exist at all. So if Rav Asher is right, so why is there a rabbinic category which is itself so weak and so subject to machloket if, as Rav Asher says, anything that's created is automatically, biblically prohibited, makeh b'patish. Like there's just, again, you could get very fancy and say molid is a certain type of creation, and makeh b'patish is a different type of creation. Maybe it's qualitative differences, maybe it's quantitative differences, but I really do have this textual problem where if Rav Asher was right, molid would be unnecessary. It would be caught under what he calls this catch-all called makeh b'patish, and therefore I could basically construct, as Abigail hints at, the same argument as Rav Asher, but call that the Beit Yitzchak, right? Meaning, say that the Beit Yitzchak, who said electricity is usher midirabanan because of molid, is another way of basically taking Rav Asher's svara and saying anything which is created is prohibited, but saying, yeah, but not biblically. That's what molid is, not makeh b'patish, right? So part of the problem with Rav Asher is, it's based on an intuition, as Ruthie knows. It's based on intuition. Do you agree with it? If you do, then you do. If you don't, you don't.
I feel like it would be more intellectually honest to ask things like
Except he thinks the opposite, right? He thinks that, right, he thinks it's definitely not Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin is saying the spirit of Shabbos. He's saying, no, this cuts to the heart of what malacha is, right? That's the problem, right? He doesn't think this. Now, I'll be honest. Really, the intellectually honest thing for me to do is because of the people, because he's still alive, really I should just, ask him. If I had the time, I really should just ask him. Maybe I will one day when I have the chance, right? He's wonderful. Now, admittedly, every time I actually heard him talk about in person in the Five Towns a while ago, about 9 years ago, I think he came for Shabbos to the Five Towns. So I was just married, so it was easy to travel. So we just spent Shabbos in the Five Towns and followed him around and listened. It was fun. Yeah, it was fun. We stayed by my former principal, by Reverend Friedman. It was fun. It was great. I was very close to Reverend Friedman, and and he talked about it, and he said, this is his halachic shita. Even then, which he said, I get the most feedback about. Agreeing, disagreeing, people write me letters all the time about it. Meaning, he's been defending this position for a while, right? Now, let's talk for a minute about Yom Tov. Let's say he's right. So what about Yom Tov? So if he's right, presumably there should be minimal difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Though even according to him, you'd have to ask whether if it was actually in direct service of Ochel Nefesh, might there be room to be lenient? Even for him, you might have to ask that question. Makeh b'patish is not the normal malacha that we knock off on Yom Tov for Ochel Nefesh, but as we saw in Tosfot, Bona you might be able to if it's directly Ochel Nefesh, right? So, maybe Rav Asher will say, makeh b'patish is never mutter on Yom Tov. But on the other hand, maybe you'd say, well, if I'm turning on an electric stovetop to cook something, that's really direct ochel nefesh. So maybe you should be makil, right? You really have to ask, like, we've seen that malachot that aren't classically mutter, when used in direct service of food, can potentially be mutter. So you really have to ask whether it would be fair to automatically copy and paste from whatever he says on Shabbos to Yom Tov, even if you really do think it's Mako Patish. I don't know. I have my doubts. You might be able to, because again, it's not a classic malacha which is permitted on Yom Tov, but it's not crazy to say that certain things which are directly ochel nefesh related would potentially be permitted. So I'll give you another example. Let me give you a, I talked about this Rabbi Broid once. A Rav Asher Weiss l'shitato, right? Rav Asher Weiss says electricity is Mako Patish. So let's say that he would therefore say Mako Patish is not a normal malacha that's permitted on Yom Tov, so even if it's in the service of food, you couldn't use it. So I said, okay, but let's take a similar malacha. Let's take boneh. Right, so let's say he disagrees with Tosfos' exact analysis, but Rav Asher Weiss himself happens to hold, it's a machlokas poskim, but this is Rav Asher's position, that making sushi is boneh. Okay? It's a machlokas poskim, but Rav Asher Weiss thinks that based on a Magen Avraham, that whenever you create food in a specific design and shape that holds together, that's boneh. So he says making sushi on Shabbos is asur midoraita. It's boneh. Okay? Would Rav Asher Weiss think that making sushi on Yom Tov is prohibited? My guess would be no. Right? Meaning, I'm literally making food. Why should it be asur? Right? So, okay. So now, thought experiment. So, if you're going to permit boneh for food, you're going to let someone make sushi, what if you had an electric sushi maker? And yes, there was such a thing. I don't know if there is. Right? So now, what would you say? The boneh of making sushi is permitted on Yom Tov because it's for ochel nefesh. But use electricity, which is makav patish, which is a related type of malacha, that's asur. But why? Right? Meaning, if you're going to say I'm going to permit boneh, which according to him, making sushi is boneh, I'm going to allow it for food, but I'm not going to allow an electric sushi maker because it's makav patish. But wait a second, you just said you could be matir boneh. Now, it could be he'll tell me, no, you can't make sushi on Yom Tov either. But I think that'd be weird because you can make cheese, right, which is boneh, right? Right? But my point is it just highlights the problem, right? Which is if you think you can violate boneh, which is not a normal food malacha, to make cheese, and therefore presumably to make sushi on Yom Tov. So why can't you use an electric sushi maker, right? Meaning, by the same token, right? Again, if you think it's molid, so then you have a reason. Because on molid, we know that even for food, we prohibit, right? But if you think it's a malacha, we actually do waive malachos when they are directly in service of food. Right? And therefore, you really, when it comes to Yom Tov, things get a little bit tricky because of ochel nefesh. Yeah, the sushi thing is very interesting. I gave this share a few years ago. It's interesting. What? Yeah. Ray Broid and I were like, look, I went to visit Ray Broid last year before he left, and at his apartment by the shuk. And we were just talking, and like this, I don't know why this was the thought experiment we came up with, but we came up with this halachic thought experiment, which was, that according to Rav Asher Weiss, the electric sushi maker, what would you say? Now, there are other folks going to say that sushi is totally permitted. I'm not, I tend to personally think it's worth being machmir, but whatever. What? I don't, as surprising as it is, I don't think it's, look, Rav Asher himself says, this is sort of surprising, but it does seem to emerge from the Magen Avraham. I tend to agree with him that it's a surprising conclusion, but it's a pretty plausible read of the Magen Avraham as things go, and the Magen Avraham is the main posek on Orach Chayim. So, basically, look, when I gave this share, there's not so much written on it, right? Ari Zatz wrote an article about it in the Journal of Contemporary Halacha a few years ago. Rav Asher Weiss wrote a response to that article, which is his tshuva. Rav Belsky had this short thing for the OU, and I asked I found out the psak of Shlomo Miller, who's like one of the main poskim in Toronto, in the Haredi community. So Ray Miller is totally makel. Ray Miller thinks it's totally mutter. He just doesn't think it's boneh. He doesn't think that it fits that structure. It's not that cohesive. It's not that, whatever. It's a shape, okay? It's like making a sandwich. It's like making a wrap, right? Like it has a shape, right? It's round and stays together, but like it's not like cheese, right? Which is like, you make cheese. It's right. That's the Gemara talks about is boneh. Fine. He doesn't buy that it's boneh. Rav Asher thinks, you could. He's like, I'm not sure about this, but on balance, I think you have to be machmir for this understanding of the Magen Avraham and say it's boneh. And then there was like the OU's psak, because I got it from them. It's like I emailed around like the OU, the Star K. I was like, what do you practically tell people? And like they had this very like convoluted psak, which was like, well, we think it might be boneh, and therefore we would tell you not to do it. But we tell people that if they really, really, really need to have sushi at an event, then we'll let them have sushi if the person making the sushi is non-Jewish. And I'm like, okay, that's like, it's hedging and like, it was like, but that was like when they emailed me, that's their policy is, I always get a little bit, I'm always a little bit surprised, but like, if you really, really need sushi, if it's like a shas chak, I'm like, I don't know what a sushi shas chak is, like, it's beyond me, right? Like, I saw, Ray Miller has a thing of that if it's a shas chak that you need to use whipped cream. I'm like, I don't know what these things are, right? Like, I can't imagine a situation like that. If you think it's asur, it's asur. If you think it's mutter, it's mutter, right? But to say like it might be asur, so you use it on Jew, and okay, I don't know. Sometimes folks can hedge. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, I understand that some people like need their sushi. I get it, but.
I don't like that at all.
No, look, I really think people can survive without sushi on Shabbos.
I think they can too, but like you should actually come up with the stock.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think saying it's usher is plausible. Saying it's mutter is plausible. Anyway, fine.
There's no place to say if you really need your sushi.
Well, we think it might be usher, so hey, if you really need it, then hedge and do it derabanan with an amino and achri. I mean, okay. Whatever. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, we gave this series on Shabbos food related issues in Toronto. So like I gave one on sushi and rice paper wraps. This all started because you get the weirdest shilas sometimes, but like someone stopped me in the middle of the street when I was in Toronto, like going home, and like desperate, like, Rabbi, I'm glad I found you. My wife has a shaila. Can you make rice paper wraps on Shabbos? I'm like, what? I'm like, because the rice paper is hard, and then you have to soak it in water to make it usable, right? And then you wrap it, right? So the question was, is it usher to, right, basically make it usable? Is that like makev patish, right?
Or is that just like the way that you eat?
Yeah. So my answer at the time was, I have literally no idea what rice paper is. I was like, I later had to look it up and then discovered that this is like the posh thing in Toronto, that everyone was making rice paper wraps. So like, and then I even asked, I emailed it to the person who conveys the shilas to Shlomo Miller, because I said he's like the Haredi posek in Toronto. He's like the Rosh Kollel of the Lakewood Kollel. So like, I was like, he thought it was mutter. He was like, I finally got a response. He's like, I think it's mutter. I don't think it's makavadish. But like, and then so when they did that, I gave them sushi and rice paper wraps. I'm like, and I was like, how much could there be on this? And the answer is like, there was so much on this, It was interesting. Okay, but that's model one. And like I said, it gets murky when Yom Tov is brought into the picture. Okay, second one, Rav Rabinovich. So, Rav Rabinovich, Zichrono Livracha, said, I think this is when we did it, right? We were surveying some of Rabinovich's positions after he passed away last year, because this year has been a terrible year for not just Corona, but we have lost like every modern Orthodox gadol, like who's alive, like Rabinovich at the beginning of the year, then Rav Zaliev Schwartz, and Rav Henkin 2 weeks ago. It's been what? What? Oh yeah, Yes, I have like tried as many people as I could like give shiurim based on their Torah. I'm still like I'm like backlogged. There's been so many. Like I gave in right back. I gave on Rabinovich, but like I've not gotten a chance on Rabbi Schwartz. I've not gotten a chance on Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin really broke me. That was very hard. I'm a huge fan of Rav Henkin's stock. I was like that was terrible. Yeah, but I was like in Bidud then. I just didn't. Yeah, I really should. I should get back to it. His farm are wonderful. They're really wonderful. Okay. So Rabinovich, if you remember, was asked about this, and he was asked a few years ago, well, can you actually use electric key cards only in hospitals because, refuah? And Rabinovich just basically broke down and said, look, it's not usher. It's not just usher. It's not just mutter in hospitals and the army. It's mutter. Why? Because he said, enough is enough. How do we paskin? We paskin from Zalma. It's not really usher. Why is it usher? So, as we saw, there are different models, and he says, I have a Masorah from Rav Henkin Senior. Rav Yosef Eliyahu Rav Henkin Senior. Right? I mean, the Rav Henkin who passed away 2 weeks ago, Rav Herzl-Henkin was his grandson. The name of his farm are B'nai Banim, right? Because he learned his Torah from his grandfather. So he's that's like his identity, that he's a grandson. What?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because his spiritual hero is his grandfather, right? Basically, he said, his story with it is that basically he was supposed to go to college, and then he basically decided that he was going to put college on hold because his grandfather was ailing, and he went and learned for 5 years with his grandfather at his house, and that was, So Rabinovich has a Masorah from Yosef Eliyahu Henkin that really what we hold is that electricity is usher because it violates the spirit of Shabbat, what we call, right, Uvdin Dechol. It's a weekday-like activity. But Rabinovich said if that's the case, then presumably, what should be usher? Only electricity, which is a violation of the spirit of Shabbos. And if it's not, then it's not usher. Right, so if you look at 6, he says, obviously, if I use electricity to perform a malacha, right, I use an electric grinder, so then I'm violating grinding. Okay, that's obvious. That's not the question. What if I use electricity for a non-malacha? Simply closing circuits, that's not biblically prohibited. It's rabbinically prohibited because it's a weekday activity. So the original poskim, they were worried about electricity because you could use it for all the malachot. But now electricity is developed. There's so much automation, you don't even have to touch it. Not on Shabbos, not on Friday. Right? So how much can we really attribute to man things that were done with automation? I wrote there must be some limit. It has to be a case where you're not part of the system. But shows at the end of the it has to be that you realize what you're doing. It's evident to the senses. But if you're not touching it, right? So you said, first of all, it's not usher. Second of all, even when it is usher, there has to be some sort of involvement. But things with automation, right? That's not usher. It's just not. So, according to, and I won't reread it because we did see this last year, but just to remind you, in 7, I gave you a different show by Rabinovich with conversion, right? Where he says, right, Rabinovich is, if you remember, we did this last year, that his suggestion to solve the conversion problem in Israel is Giruktanim, to convert people when they're children. Right? And some people push back, why would you convert people when they're children? They're not going to keep Shabbos. You're setting them up for failure, because if they're not from, and they're not from families, they're not going to keep Shabbos. If they were not Jewish, it'd be great. But if they're Jewish, it's going to be a problem. And his answer was, hey, what are they going to do? Use electricity, watch television? That's not really usher. I mean, I'm not telling you to do it, but he's like, fundamentally, that's not usher. Like, right? Electricity is not really usher, so that's your taina. Or he really believed this. He took this very seriously. So according to him, he already started saying that Lamaisa, you could use electricity on Shabbos. Right? Right? He said you could use an electric key card in a hotel room on Shabbos because you're not doing anything. That's not created. It's not against the spirit of Shabbos. You're opening the door.
How would you determine what is or isn't?
Good. Right. So Ruthie is highlighting the problem, which is, first of all, right, people don't take this seriously. Second of all, we don't know what it is. Right? It's very hard to define. Given. Right?
Would that be like a personal thing? Like, if I should determine, like...
Good. Right. So you'll have to get into the question, because clearly there is a personal level. Right? So some poskim will say, look, playing board games. Well, if you're the biggest Talmud Chacham in the world, so that's not Shabbos Dik, you should be learning Torah. But for the average person who would spend his whole week, whatever, so playing a family board game is fine. Yes, I know. That's like the Yerushalmi, right? That people who don't learn during, right, Balabatim who don't learn during the week, on Shabbos they should learn. And Talmidei Chacham who learn during the week should sleep on Shabbos. Right? That's the Yerushalmi. So yeah, you could say that too. So there is a subjective level to it. It's hard to define, right? Meaning, those are different questions, right? One is saying maybe it's subjective on the person. The second is even if there's a universal standard, it's hard to actually put your finger on what that is. So already on Shabbos it opened up the door, but I would add that on Yom Tov it'll open the door even more, right? Because it's hard. On Shabbos you could say, look, food preparation is still malacha. So even if I'm not actually involved in a malacha food preparation, maybe I should not use electricity there because, like, cooking is not in the spirit of Shabbos, because actual cooking is malacha. But doing, like, using electricity to do, like, fancy food preparation, maybe you could argue it's against the spirit of Shabbos because it's too much like cooking. I don't know. I'm not taking a firm opinion on that, right? But on Yom Tov, even if that was true, it wouldn't be the case. Because on Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook, right? And therefore, Ruthie's right. It's hard to put your finger on it. But I think it's pretty clear that anything that might in any way, shape, or form be defined as Ochel Nefesh, right, or Ochel Nefesh-esque, presumably on Yom Tov, it's impossible to argue that's against the spirit of Yom Tov, right? Because Yom Tov, we know that you're even allowed to do malacha that's in the process of food. So presumably, it would be hard to define malacha of electricity is like going against the spirit if it's using it for food, because it's not malacha, according to Rabbi Navitch, and food preparation is in the spirit of Yom Tov.
I feel like you just have to define it from a personal oriented.
Correct. I think you're exactly right. And therefore, the electric sushi maker, right, presumably would obviously be mutter, right, on Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Navitch, because it's food preparation. Unless Rabbi Navitch passed me about you can't make sushi. Maybe. I don't know. I have no idea what I doubt he passed in that way. I don't know. Right? It's just knowing his stock a little bit, it's not the type of thing I would expect from him, but I don't know. Right? Yeah. So someone last year I was in a program at Migdalos, and one of the people in the group was Rabbi Navich's granddaughter. Right? And she said that one of the problems they have around, like that they see around Maladumim is that, like, Gush has, like, a reputation of being not so frum. We're not frum guys, right? We're not frum. And Maladumim has a bit, in the Israeli context, is a much frummer reputation. But he said that there are a lot of people who, like, a lot of women, when they date guys from Gush Maladumim, which are, like, in similar hashkafic worlds, right, they're traumatized because Gush guys, hashkafically, maybe a little bit more liberal sometimes, but ones who are like really Talmidei or Lichtenstein are tend to be big machmirim. Because Aaron was a big machmir in halacha, right? And they're like shocked because they expect, these open-minded guys, and then suddenly you realize, like, none of them carry an eruv, right? Like, or whatever the case may be, right? As opposed to Maladumim, where, like, it comes off a little bit frummer, but Rabinovich is a huge makil on like big things like electricity and conversion and like everything under the sun. He's like a very makil posing, and they're like traumatized. So suddenly, so they had this, which I found very funny. Also somewhat true to my experience. So again, Rabinovich, I think, as much as on Shabbos it opens up cooler, I think on Yom Tov it's going to open up even more. Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, so let me summarize it outside of today. We did this last year, so I don't feel like I need. But Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, if you remember, argued the following. He says it is Doraisa, but it's a unique Doraisa. He argues the Rambam in a slightly different way argue that in addition to Malacha, there's on Shabbos there's something called Shabbaton. What's Shabbaton? There's an obligation to make Shabbos Shabbosdik, right? To maintain the spirit of Shabbos, and therefore you shouldn't work and do business and things like that, because that would destroy the day. What? No, this is Rabbi Yaakov Ariel. So he says. So this is the Ramban, but the Ritva already asked. I don't understand. The Ramban says that doing business on Shabbos is Asr Mid'oraisa. But Chazal say that doing business is Asr Mid'Rabbanan, not because it destroys the spirit of the day, but because it's Zera Shema, right? Because if you're doing business, you might end up writing a deed, right, or a contract. So how can the Ramban say that doing business on Yom Tov is a violation of Shabbaton, or the obligation to maintain the spirit of the day, if it's biblically prohibited, right? If the rabbis say it's only rabbinically prohibited. So the Ritva's answer, if you skip for a second to 9, is it depends. If you do one act of business, right, like just one Shabbos, you're in shul, and someone comes over to you and says, I have a deal. I know that you own, I don't know, what do you own? What? A boat? Okay, boats. I really like your boats, and I'm willing to pay you 10 times what you paid for it, right? And, I don't need a contract. I know it's your Sabbath. I don't need a contract, whatever. I don't care, right? You don't need to write anything. We'll shake on it. I'll give you the money, right? But let's just do the deal. So according to the Ritva, what the Ramban would tell you is that is biblically permitted if you do it once, right? Right? And it's not a habit, because it didn't destroy your Shabbos, right? Rabbinically, it's prohibited. But if you go to work and you work consistently, then not only is it rabbinically prohibited, it's biblically prohibited because you've destroyed the spirit of Shabbos in total. Yeah, we got it.
Why wouldn't the other Ramban say that if there's literally no star here, then wouldn't it be the Rabbanan allowed?
No, because according to the Rabbanan, you're not allowed to do business because you might end up having a deed and whatever.
But you're already not allowed.
Right, rabbinically, so if you look at Ritva 9, he says, when we say that something is rabbinically prohibited as a shvut, that's not to tell you that there's no such thing as a biblical prohibition of shvut. Because then Shabbat would turn into a weekday. Businesses would be open, selling wine and produce. You'd be schlepping things around, you'd be measuring things. It makes no sense that you're not allowed to carry your keys into Rosh Hashanah, but you're allowed to schlep things back and forth between your two houses, in your one chutzner, right? That's crazy. That's not called a day of rest. But every individual act, when you do the one act, desire, but you're careful, right? You're careful about everything else. You do one thing because it's necessary. The law of a Shabbat Kechol, and it doesn't destroy your whole Shabbos. So then, at a Shvut D'Rabbanan, then it's only Rabbanan, Right? So the Ritva's argument, and the Chassam Sofer says the same thing, is that basically many of the things that we call derabanan are not really derabanan. What the rabbis did is they found basically an excuse to take the actions that were you to do them consistently, they would destroy Shabbos and be shvut de'oraita, and they prohibited even once because of, even off chances that you'd perform a malacha. So based on that, Rabbi Yaakov Ariel argues as follows. Right in 8. He says, midumani, it seems to me, most folks can pass me with Shlomo Zalman. Electricity isn't really usher. Maybe it's Rabbanan, like Shmelkis. Unless you're performing a malacha with the electricity, etc. But the Chazanish thinks it's usher d'oraisa. Udato, and he thought, as we saw, Bonen or Shlomo Zalman didn't agree, etc. Skip down to line 4. If I had to guess and really get into the Chazanish's head, he was worried, Rav, and correctly so, that if you allowed people to use electricity, so Shabbos would turn into a weekday. He understood based on his expansive wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, electricity couldn't be permitted. It seems to me therefore I think that even if you think that using electricity once is maybe the Rabbanan, it might be that if you use electricity consistently, that would be biblical. Why? Because the Ramban. We were commanded from the Torah to make Shabbos Shabbosdik, to not measure and do business, etc. And the Ramban says, the last line of this indent is, that Shabbos should be Shabbos. This is beautiful for our generation. Technology has advanced so much. Most people during the week, they don't do physical, manual labor. They press buttons. They make decisions. We don't use, there's no physical expenditure of energy. But there's stress. Baruch Hashem, thank God, thank God He gave us this day, this Sambatyon, this spiritual Sambatyon, that the mythical river, that the rocks stop popping up on Shabbos, right? Just peace and quiet. Lo telephone, lo fax, lo machshev, lo radio, right? I don't know if I have to translate that, right? Right? Lo rechev, lo shum davar machshir acher. I was reading whatever to. You ever heard the book Scarcity? Yeah, it's a very good book. Anyways, it's a book of behavioral psychology, basically analyzing the effect of what they call scarcity thinking, the way that it forces us to tunnel, it taxes our bandwidth, right? It makes it we can't really make good decisions because we're so much thinking about what we're lacking, right? And they note that the scarcity of what we normally think of as scarcity, as poverty, is like the most intense and the most classic. But they note that even people who are taxed for time, right, who are overworked, have the same thing, right? They make bad decisions, they're more stressed out because they're constantly thinking about the fact that they're behind on time, right? You can have scarcity of anything, and at some point in the middle, they, right, are talking about different things you can do to solve the problems of scarcity thinking. And one of the things they say is, we know of no better solution than the Jewish Sabbath. And then This is like one of them is is Indian, and one of them is Israeli. And then they quote like a page or two from Heschel's The Sabbath on why the solution to modern scarcity thinking is Shabbos. And that's what the Rabbi is saying. He says, "Ashreinu matam chalkeinu matova matana nedush natan l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu nechal Am Yisrael shamaton moedim l'kedusha menuchad is great gift for rest, for pease. The Torah is simcha l'chein and fiat na'adati shegam l'goskim asperim shemachshim chasmeinu esrim el midarabanan. Therefore, even people who think that it's technically derabanan or less, ein lakel b'shimush b'hem el misha atzchak gadol. You should only use it when you really need to." Right. So he's basically saying, look, in a medical context or something like that, then you can say, make her in, it's really mutter. And now there's a pressing need because of medical things. Okay, so use it. But to make it a lifestyle, right, to use computers and cell phones and whatever and destroy Shabbos, that's a real problem. Now, if Rabbi Yaakov is right, similar analysis will apply that we saw the Rabbi Minovich. So what about Yom Tov? So in Yom Tov also you have to have a spirit of Yom Tov. But again, the spirit of Yom Tov is different. If I'm using it for food-related things, presumably, that's completely within the spirit of Yom Tov, right? Presumably, and that's why we saw last time that the Chazon Ish also seems to. I gave you an 11 that Benny Brown quotes a student of the Chazon Ish who said that in fact this is really what the Chazon Ish felt, was that he only used bone as sort of his excuse to forbid it, but really he thought that it just had to be usher. Right? We had to treat it as usher, but. Again, let's say you agree with Rav Ariel, the Chazon Ish, as understood by his student Rav Yehuda, that whether or not it's technically usher, you have to treat it as Nisr D'Oraisa, because otherwise it has the possibility of destroying Shabbos. Again, I think that might be true, but you could retort, first of all, that that's not true of all electricity, right? Again, the electronic key cards, same argument in Rabinovich. Is that against the spirit of Shabbos? I don't know. But Kal V'chomer and Yom Tov, if I was using electricity in the service of Okal Nefesh, presumably, there's no argument to be made that that's the destruction of the spirit. And that's why I think that once you really understand the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov halachically, and then you go back to the Svarah of electricity, you understand why it is so plausible to many poskim that whatever we say about Shabbos doesn't necessarily cover over to Yom Tov. Now, I could give you a halachic policy argument that would emerge from these sources that was actually invoked a lot in the context of the Zoom Seder that would apply to Yom Tov, and that is most people don't really understand the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. And using screens and the like really is what destroys the spirit of Shabbos and Yom Tov. And therefore, if we start permitting it on Yom Tov, right, this is the end of Shabbos and Yom Tov as we know it. That may be true. I personally really do believe that, right? I believe, right, whatever you want to postulate on electricity, I tend to think that, yeah, if we really allowed screens on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it would be destructive. I would hate it, right? I would just hate it, right? Like, I love turning off my cell phone. I love the fact I don't expect anyone to email me. No one expects me to email them back, or WhatsApp. 25 hours I don't have to see WhatsApp is like, it's a bracham and shamayim. Like, I'm just sick of WhatsApp. It's just torture, right? It's like, it's enough. I can't stand every 3 seconds a message from, every group of how are we going to deal with the next shutdown with all our students? Like, when you have every yeshiva in the world on one big WhatsApp, it's torture. It's crazy, right? It's like, we have all these WhatsApps and it's driving me nuts, right? On Shabbos, like, okay, in 25 hours, I don't care. Figure out what you're doing with your students. I'm home. I don't care anymore, right? Like, you figure it out. Like, But the big caveat is, sure, but that may be an argument to say that Zoom Seders should be usher, because that's against the spirit. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you say that a Zoom Seder, bringing your family who's stuck, and that's really what the rabbis, right, these rabbis in Maghreb said, look, what do you mean? Our family is stuck without anybody for the Seder. It's even in the spirit of Yom Tov. Okay, I hear that. I don't necessarily agree, and I think maybe the policy to do that would really be destructive, but that's, I think an intuition of the posting. But I think if you think that, like either Rabbi Runovich or Rabbi Yaakov Ariel for that matter, that it's spirit of Shabbos either the rabbinic or biblical level, so fine, but a microwave should be mutter by that argument, right? right? And cooking is mutter, so, what? Yeah. Meaning, according to this, again, I'm not postulating, but according to these shitot, if it's about the spirit of the day, anything that produces food should be in the spirit of Yom Tov, not Shabbos, but Yom Tov. Right? A microwave, presumably, would be mutter. This magical sushi making machine that I have imagined, right, should be mutter, right?
With the Zeus dinner, you could also argue that the reason why
Correct, of course. There you could say, well, maybe it's only mutter under these circumstances.
never habituate.
Correct, right. You could say they were habituated, though there were many people who were, especially in the non-Orthodox community, who said, like, this is the beginning of the end, right? That if we allow this is the big, right? Meaning, again, I listened to an interview by David Wolpe last year, right? He's a conservative rabbi on the West Coast, and he just, he was really worried about this. He said, like, like in the end of the day.
Well, there's a difference between like what you're going to concentrate on and what
Oh, no, in economy, and that's why, I think that there was such a pushback on policy, because, yeah, you could say technically mutter, but, so again, we looked at these sources last year, but I think that now that you really understand the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, you realize that on Yom Tov, this really makes a big difference. Because if you think it's about the spirit of the day, anything in the food-related thing, presumably using electricity for that is in the spirit of the day. Right? And there's no, danger. What's the danger? That people are going to cook? They're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Right? I don't think saying you're allowed to use a microwave on Yom Tov is going to lead someone to microwave on Shabbos. They use a stove on Yom Tov, they don't on Shabbos. Right? People know that. And therefore, there's this real gap where you really, really have to, as hard as it is to understand electricity in general and why it's usher, and as complicated as it is, Yom Tov adds such a layer of complication because already on the malacha level, there's these limits, right? And therefore, I'm going to guess that Rabbi Ariel does not use his microwave on Yom Tov, right? I'm almost sure of that. But I really would wonder, if I asked Rabbi Ariel and said, why? What's he going to say? He destroys the spirit of Yom Tov? I mean, I don't understand. If you think that fundamentally, maybe he'll take molid, that he thinks it's molid, right? So you can't use it. Okay, maybe. Fine. But I don't know if
Why is that more molid than, literally anything else?
No, meaning it could be that he really postulates like Shmuel, right? He does seem to think that Shlomo Zalman would agree with the Beis Yitzchak, that it's molid. So, okay. So that's a technical reason. But let's say I said I don't really think it's molid, right? For whatever reason, or I don't know, I leave my microwave on a timer, right? Right? So presumably it's mutter, right? I mean, I can't imagine why it's not mutter. I'm allowed to cook. Why shouldn't I be allowed to have a microwave? Right? Turning on the microwave, okay, that would hang on whether you think it's molid, right? If you're not convinced it's molid, so then it should be mutter, right? It should be mutter. It should be. Look, I can't imagine if your microwave is on a timer, then anyone would say it's usher, right? Meaning, even if it were fire, it would be mutter, right? But I don't think people think this way, right? I think, I think that probably every posek in the world would tell you that if you left your microwave on a timer, it would be mutter to microwave something on Yom Tov, right? I don't know exactly how you do that. I'm not sure you can, but let's say you could, right?
Just have it go on for 30 seconds.
Yeah, right? You know that you are, you want to have a family story reading session on Yom Tov night, and you want popcorn, right? So you know you're going to need it, right? Like you plan it for 8 o'clock, right after dinner, and you put you put it in the microwave, right? And then it just goes on the timer. I can't imagine any posting in the world thinks that's usher. Because if you wanted to turn your stove on and make popcorn old-fashioned, right, with with actual kernels of corn, you would be allowed to do that. Yes, so does my wife. We never, she always does it that way. But, I didn't know people did that until, I had no idea that was a thing. But yeah, presumably every posting in the world would say that's mutter, right? And yet, I feel like, despite that, most people would feel uncomfortable with that. But there's literally I can't imagine why. right? Meaning you're going to let someone do it on the stove. Everyone would be allowed to do that. You're allowed to cook.
Would the fact that people are uncomfortable with it make it usher for them?
So this is, right, that's an interesting question. Is this spirit, why do people feel uncomfortable? Because electricity has become basically, as a Jewish community, especially a Shomer Shabbos community, we've come to identify the whole world of technology basically as what makes Shabbos and Yom Tov different from the weekday. And therefore we have this aversion. We want to keep the spirit right, and therefore we have halachic reasons for that, and yet, right, we don't have that aversion to turn on your hot plate on a timer, which is identical halachically, right? We don't have that aversion to setting your air conditioning on a timer, right? We don't have that aversion, many poskim allow you to put your dishwasher on a timer, right? But a microwave, I feel like most people would be like, no, you can't use it. It feels weird. I mean, it does, but right, or a blender, yeah, good, a blender, right? I know I want to have a smoothie, right? So, I'll just put it on a timer, right? Presumably on Yom Tov, that should be totally mutter, right? I'll leave it on, the setting. It'll go on automatically. I mean, it's a bit of a dangerous thing to do. I can't, out of safety, of all things to put on a timer, I cannot imagine that the blender is a great idea, right? But fine, the microwave. I mean, but no, I understand. I mean, a blender, good example, right? Or I don't know, your KitchenAid. You want to make fresh bread, right? No, but definitely putting it on a timer would be fine. I can't imagine it wouldn't be fine. On Yom Tov. No, again, not on Shabbos. Right, I just, no, that's more for the recording. If someone's going to say, oh, he said it's obviously much, on Shabbos, it would be usher. It could be tochen, it could be all types of things, right? But that's because cooking and tochen and all that is usher on Shabbos. But in Yom Tov, why would it be usher, right? Meaning, you're allowed to turn, you have an electric stove, you put it on a timer, right? Why not, right? You could do that. What? You could. I'm sure people do. I'm sure people do. I'm sure people put their electric stoves on. I don't know how easy it is to do that, but I've never tried. I have a gas stove. I don't know.
If I have my blender plugged in,
so I think it's obviously mutter on Yom Tov, obviously. And I still think people would feel uncomfortable, but and that's my point, is that it's true that in our minds, basically to protect Shabbos, we have defined the thing that divides Shabbos and Yom Tov from Chol is electricity. Right? That's basically what's going on. But especially when it comes to Yom Tov, the fact that you can't say that as a blanket, because anything that's related to cooking is obviously mutter, right? It really forces you to ask. And look, on a timer, I don't think any posting, when they really thought about it, could say it's usher. Why not? Again, maybe it's not the safest idea with a blender. If you miss it, right, and that blade just starts I don't know. I don't know. You can figure it out. Yeah, so in the conceptual laboratory, I think it would definitely be fine to set a timer for a blender to make a smoothie on Yom Tov. Why shouldn't it be? You're allowed to make food. Why not? But that's obvious. And yet, I think you're right, that people have this feeling that's just weird. But they shouldn't, right? Now, the question of when you're not talking about a timer, right? I'm making it easier with a timer, because then I'm removing the malacha and I'm saying it just feels weird. There, I think it's obvious you say it shouldn't feel weird, because you can cook, so why shouldn't you blend? Yeah. Right? The question, though, is if you think that electricity to begin with is only about the spirit of the day, then you should be able, theoretically, to turn on your blender. Right? That's the problem. And this is, remember when I said at the beginning of the year that this is why Yom Tov and electricity to me is so, confuses me, is that someone who really believes that electricity on Yom Tov, that electricity on Shabbos is only the spirit of the day, should say that on Yom Tov there's a whole host of things that are just mutter. Lechatchila shebelechatchila. Right? Things that are clearly active.
Is there anything about the spirit of Yom Tov?
There is, but it can't be the things that are used to produce food are against the spirit. Because, again, why would cooking be mutter and within the spirit of the day, but blending not, right? Meaning, you could, look, halachically, using a garlic press is tochen, right? But I feel like most people on Yom Tov are like, oh yeah, of course I can use my garlic press to cook, right? Yeah. But their blender Oh no, but I honestly don't understand. Right? It's the exact same thing, right? Right? You're grinding or whatever you're doing, right? Meaning,
what halacha you think you're doing with electricity.
and that's exactly the point. But what are you doing? So then you put it on a timer. So I think everyone would agree that if I can put my electric stove on a timer, I should be able to put my blender on a timer and my microwave on a timer. I think everyone would actually agree to that. I don't even think like this is controversial. I think that people don't think about it, right? Meaning, plenty of people have, especially here, it's less common in America, but people have timers on their gas stoves here, right? There's the chagaz. You ever see a chagaz? Right? Chagaz is basically, it's a very little, it was made by Machon Soman, and basically it just attaches to the gas pipe. And it's a timer that basically makes it that it's like a reverse timer. It doesn't turn it on, it turns it off. That it just cuts the gas after an hour of the gas having been on, so that you don't have to leave the gas on the whole Yom Tov, right?
That's really smart.
Yeah, it's like a very simple device. That's obviously mutter. Like, why shouldn't it be mutter, right? I'm turning it on and then it cuts the gas, right? Right, I didn't cut the gas. I didn't do Mechaber, cut the gas. Okay, so I think though, like I said, I wanted to give this year again, because even though we've seen it, now that we've learned about Shabbos and Yom Tov, now you see why at the beginning of the year I said that Yom Tov creates a very interesting new set of problems, and when you actually understand the differences, and you go back to these as electricity, you realize, wait, there's a whole gap here where I think Ruthie's right, that people would feel weird doing it, but halachically, there are certain things, like a timer should clearly be mutter, right? I don't think there's anybody, when they actually thought about it, would say that you can't set a timer to make yourself microwave popcorn on Yom Tov. I don't think anyone should be able to say that. I think it's obviously mutter.
But for like not food related things.
Good.
No, and on just.
So non-food related things, I think that you have a different question, right? Meaning, like the Zoom Seder, right? The Zoom Seder, I think you could have a real machloket. Is that the spirit of the day? Is there something at the screen that moves us away from like the type of friendships that we normally get to form on Shabbos and Yom Tov, where you are forced to be in person? I think you can make an argument there, or a policy argument, which is even if right now it's all we can do, but long term we don't want to change the paradigm, right? And yet I think that people have the same intuitions about setting a timer on a microwave, right? I think they do, and I think it's weird, right? I mean, there's literally no reason that should be usher, right? There's no reason saying, right, if you could do that. I don't know if you could do it. I assume you could figure out how to do it. Yeah.
Oh, I was asking, like, because people have created this identity of
electricity as being against the spirit of the day.
Yeah.
So that's really the question, is that, but again, you could say, so therefore it's usher. But on the other hand, again, I don't think people have the same intuition about a hot plate, right? Because we're used to having hot plates on Shabbos even, right? So why should a hot plate be different than a microwave, right? I mean, a hot plate is definitely worse than a microwave. But a hot plate actually has a heating element, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's actually usher midaraisa according to everybody. It has a heating filament, right? It's literally, that's actually usher midaraisa.
If you can,
But a microwave
would be the same thing as turning on a light.
Ripping a microwave, according to Rosh Zalman, is not cooking, right? Rosh Zalman thinks that on Shabbos, Ruthie, right? Like Rosh Zalman says that making something in a microwave on Shabbos is only usher midarabanan, right? So making it on a hot plate is mutter, right? Which is usher midaraisa on Shabbos to turn that thing on. Then the microwave, which even on Shabbos, according to Rosh Zalman, is only derabanan. So on Yom Tov should definitely not be a problem, and yet people have an intuition the opposite, just because we're used to hot plates and we're not used to setting a timer on a microwave, right? There's clearly a gap there, right? There's clearly something that's weird, because it's not electricity in general. We don't have that intuition about our air conditioning and heating and hot plate. We just do about, right? And again, and that's why I think that once you realize during Shabbos and Yom Tov, and you go back to electricity, you realize, like, we need to have a much more nuanced conversation about Yom Tov. And again, the Zoom Seder was when you saw that people suddenly exploded, because the rabbis of the Maghreb said, yeah, we never thought that electricity was really usher on Yom Tov, and therefore we need it right now so families can be together as mutter, and everyone else freaked, right? I doubt they would have freaked if they said, right, this year people are home, and it's harder for them to really cook, so we're going to encourage them to put their microwaves on a timer, because they just need to have enough food for themselves and have a low key. I think everyone would have said, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a great stock. That's a good, right? I think everyone would have said that. Screens, right? And suddenly everyone went to the meta questions. But like, they missed in there. There's a lot of halachic things that are going on that, yes, screens are a certain type of violation, but like, the electricity question forces us to ask a lot of other halachic questions. Yeah.
So, light was one of the
So again, lights, you'll say, oh, what about lights? Well, the answer is the Aruch HaShulchan thought you could turn on lights on Yom Tov, or Soloveitchik thought you could turn on lights on Yom Tov, right? This is not even like a crazy position that wasn't held by mainstream poskim. Like, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, there were major poskim who felt like, yes, you could turn on the light on Yom Tov. Oh, because it's Shavuot L'chol Nefesh, right? Because even if it's Mavir is mutter, just not Molin. And then, yes, there were... Yeah, that's exactly why. There were major poskim who felt you were allowed to turn on lights on Yom Tov. Right? Meaning, we've rejected this psak l'maisa for the last however many years. But there were major poskim, like the Aruch HaShulchan, right, Soloveitchik, right, who thought this l'maisa. It was like, apparently an open secret that he would turn on lights on Yom Tov, because that's what, because he thought it was mutter. And there's good reason to believe. Now you look at the sources, you understand why someone might think that. Right? It's not crazy at all. Right? And it's not crazy to distinguish between Shabbos and Yom Tov in that regard. It makes a lot of sense. Right? So again, I'm not poskening here. I said it 100 times, I'm not poskening, right? But you realize when you're talking about Yom Tov, why there's so much more complexity. Okay, I'm over time and I have to give Shon Aleph share. So let's, but it was good to sort of bring everything together, especially since we've had all these weeks off because of,